Hey everyone, it's Dick here. Today I conclude my viewer-requested videos discussing the difference between riding small and big bikes. Today I'm riding my BMW F700 GS. Hey everybody, it's Dick here. Today I'm out on my F700 GS Rally Edition. And as things go these days, this bike is considered a middleweight bike. An 800cc bike is the top end of your midweight bikes. And, you know, I had a request from someone on YouTube to do a comparison between a 125 and going to a full-size bike, and I decided to do kind of an incremental step. 125, 500, then 800. Since the 800 is at the top end of the midweight range, I'm going to say it's a small full-size bike. I mean, you can get a 1600cc bike if you want. I think the definition of a full-size bike has as much to do with engine capacity or displacement as it does to do with size and weight. How wieldy is it? How unwieldy is it? So, for our purposes of this video, I'm going to call this a full-size bike. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call this 800 a full-size bike. I mean, it is a relatively tall bike, it's a long bike, it's a heavy bike. For our friend moving up from a 125, this is a full-size bike. And it's not too much of a jump to 1,000 cc's. I'm sure there are people who are going to argue with me about that, but I think it's fair to say that if you're looking at an 800cc bike after riding a 125 on a learner license or a CBT, then I'd be forgiven at calling this a full-size bike, not a midweight. So what is it like? What's it like to ride a full-size bike? I would venture to say, in many respects, riding a full-size bike is easier than riding a 125. The components and the manufacturing and the quality of materials and workmanship on a full-size bike compared to a 125 is generally worlds apart. It's where the money is made. Well, actually, that's probably not true. You pay for what you get. A full-size bike is expensive. Where the fuck am I going? I'm on autopilot, aren't I? The bigger the engine, the heavier the materials you can put on it, the more expensive the bike, the lighter the weight the materials are, and you're getting a faster bike. But you'll see the quality difference between a full-size bike and a 125 just by looking at it from a distance. From across the parking lot, you'll notice the difference. And then when you get on it, you see the difference. It's more solid feeling, it's more grounded, which actually lends a lot to giving you confidence in riding it. The power is abundant. And I was saying when I was on the 125 and on the midweight, on the 500, that when you have that little bit extra to use, if you know how to use it, if you can manage that behavior, if you can manage that power on the bike, then that's safer. It's safer to do that. Don't be inexperienced, but I think someone who's gone through the appropriate training and is sensible about moving up in bikes, it's not going to be like those YouTube videos where they put Fat Mom on the Gixxer and she does a wheelie and rides into the fence. You know, I think you could have the same mishap on a 125 or a 250. And actually, thinking about those videos, I think most of them are like 250 enduro bikes that they ride into the fence or they do wheelies or endos on. So take that for what it's worth. You have to be aware of the weight. The weight of maneuvering it around the drive is my big issue when it's not under power. When a bike is under power, it always feels lighter and smaller and more agile. And a full-size bike is maneuverable as a little bike, or even more maneuverable, because you're not worried about like trying to predict or plan ahead on acceleration or trying to predict or plan ahead too much on early braking. It's more intuitive, it's more brain to action on a full-size bike than it is on a smaller bike where you have to kind of work through the gears. You can sit, I mean, I'm in third gear now through this kind of town riding, and most of these bikes have such a range. This goes up to 10,000 RPM. Most of these bikes have such a range in their RPM that you can plop into a gear and kind of run through the range of it without doing too much work in the transmission. And that's really helpful as well when you're riding. Full-size bikes make filtering more interesting. I could get through here, but those people who are nervous about filtering might not enjoy it on a full-size bike as much as they do on their 125. The seat height is good on this. I mean, it's not the low seat, but there's a bit of compression in the suspension, and I am not a tall guy, but I can put both feet flat on the ground on this. Compared to the Tiger 800 that I have access to in the States, that's a bit tiptoey if I want to put both feet down, where this is a little bit more low slung. But you do have to worry about seat height on full-size bikes. And that's another thing about moving up to a full-size bike. Are you confident keeping one foot up and putting the drive side foot down at a light? Do you need both feet planted? Beyond power management and weight and height, the difference between a full-sized bike or a big bike and a mid-weight, not too much of a difference. I think weight is the biggest consideration. Being able to move that bike around at slow speeds and or when the engine's not running. But I mean, I've been on a number of bikes and I've owned a number of bikes. I tend to love mid-weights and small displacement bikes, and I can never really justify the big guzzlers. Where I want the power is off the light or just being able to cruise out on the highway, and an 800 is plenty, more than plenty. My 500's actually quite competent. One of my favorite bikes is a 600 inline 4, which actually has an RPM, has a red line of 14,000 RPM, so that's amazing. So why would I need 1,000 cc's? I was talking about the cost of bikes. You know, the bigger the bike, the more expensive it'll be. But I think you want to keep in mind not only the expense of acquiring it, the purchase price, you have to consider the running costs of the bike. Insuring a larger displacement bike is going to be costlier. Maintenance on a bigger size bike, I'd say, is costlier, but you do have the benefit of longer service intervals. This is cool. There's Fuller's Brewery over there. I've never been up on this section of road. Wow. That's neat. You have the benefit of more time between services, so your service intervals are spread apart, which may bring the cost more in line with other bikes, but I think it's a bit more expensive for service intervals. But out on roads like this, you're taller, you're riding higher, you have more power at your command, you're more formidable on the road. So on a full-size bike, if you're doing some highway miles, or you're out on congested roads, a full-size bike is a benefit. It is much better than a smaller bike, and especially a learner bike. You could run the learner bike to its edges and command as much as you can out on the road, or at least perform out on these types of roads. But this is a slow 6-lane road. But if you got a 6-lane road out on a motorway, or out in the States 8-lane roads where people are going excess of 100 miles an hour, and you're at max at 60, you're going to be a little exposed. You're going to be a little vulnerable. Actually, you're going to be a lot vulnerable. This thing says that top speed is 150 miles an hour, and I don't doubt it. And you're going to be riding at half that most of the time on a motorway. You have twice the speed at your fingertips. And I keep coming back to that. I think that's really the distinction. The fundamental question is not what's it like, what's the difference between the bikes. Is your bike fit for purpose? What is your purpose on a motorcycle? You have to really examine the type of riding you do. I can't justify the ownership of this motorcycle. I live in a city. My responsibilities limit long touring trips in England and Europe. When I'm afforded time to go on long touring trips, it's usually in the States, and I have a bike there for that. So to keep a bike like this in London, especially if it's one of a few bikes in London, this is not the bike I grabbed the keys for. So you need to ask yourself, what type of riding do I do? And find a bike that fits both your style, but more importantly, your purpose. I love the style of this bike, and I love the purpose of this bike, but it doesn't fit my purpose. But it is fun to ride. I always forget how lovely windshields are. I think this is the only bike. Oh no, I have a little sport windshield on that 600, but it's really not a windshield. This is the only bike that has a functioning windshield. And whenever I get on it, I always wonder why I don't have more bikes with windshields. Because gosh, it really makes riding more comfortable. I can stay on this bike longer. I have an iron butt. So if I can stay on a shieldless bike for extended time, imagine how long you can stay on a bike with a windshield. That's another thing. Full-size bikes will come with hazard lights. we're talking about resale value and running costs on these bikes, this is due for its scheduled service. And the funny thing about reselling a bike here in England, if you don't have a factory service book that's stamped from the day it was first registered, from the day it comes off the factory line, it just devalues the bike. People use that as a devaluing negotiation point. And so if you do your own work, you can't stamp your book officially. How do you maintain your own motorcycle these days and then keep the value of your investment for resale? You don't. So you have to go and get it factory serviced. And when I bring this to get factory serviced, we're going to see what that running cost is. And that may be cost prohibitive. This thing takes a lot of fuel though. The fuel tank is under the seat. And it took like an amazing amount of fuel compared to the other bikes I ride. Though I bet you my other bikes with their smaller tanks will bring me further. Not as fast, but it'll bring me further. The fuel efficiency on this is probably more in line with a compact car. You also get some more features on a full-size bike. I mean, this is fully loaded. You get ABS. I mean, ABS now is standard on most new bikes over a certain capacity size. So if you're looking at a mid-size bike or a full-size bike, you're getting ABS, in Europe at least. So each bike, each size, each class, they all have their own benefits and detriments. And I think the only real answer to the question is to own more than one bike. Own one of each.
If you like that video and you want to see more like them, hit like, share, and subscribe.